Hey, it is time to remove the contradiction that we have been playing with for the past 37 episodes. Maybe you didn't notice it. Maybe you did notice it. Hi, I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to Godsearch. Well, we've been progressing well over 37 different podcasts, and all along there has been an inherent contradiction. It was unavoidable. I could not avoid it. We had to begin somewhere, and then we had to, as Dorothy had to do in the Yellow Brick Road, you had to start at the beginning and you had to progress until you wound up where your heart's desire was, which was back at home. By the way, if you go to yourgodsearch.com under publications, I think there's a neat little book that I wrote many, many years ago for my wife. It's called Soul Lessons from the Wizard of Oz. You might enjoy it. So we started at the beginning where we talked about the dangerous word God, and we talked about the fact that religions were failing and that we needed authentic spirituality, and that the only proof for God and the only authority for God was your life experience. Life experience was the authority for what was true and what isn't true. And that's obvious because basically, even science is just a collection of more controlled, but yet life experiences that out of which we generalize certain rules of how things operate. Behavioral sciences are the same way. Laws that govern, stealing and adultery and all the basic Bible stuff, they're all based on generalized experiences of life. So experience is the core to human foundations of general ideas of how life works. But here the contradiction comes into play. We began to touch on this very loosely, and we'll get more serious about it as we progress, to a in a discussion of various versions of what has been called natural law. And we talked about the fact that both, shall we say, the red team and the blue team, because they're two very nice little clear mind cracks together, are both pushing the spirituality aspect of the culture they're living in to an extreme. Each one is believing that they have rights endowed by the Creator, and therefore their view is sacred. And with the sacredness of their view and the absolutism that sacredness is interpreted as, they go to fight and they go to war, and this is absolutely a mess. However, if you remember way back at the beginning, wherever there is a contradiction, wherever there is a conflict, there is missing knowledge. The conflict arises from a contradiction in spirituality itself. Now, we went to spirituality. We didn't go near the R word because of the authoritarian problems of religion. Regardless what the religion was, it was overly authoritarian, overly controlling, and human beings eventually rebelled from the excesses of control, especially after the European experience of enlightened monarchies, where enlightened monarchies were fused with heads of churches, and before you know it, you had a completely controlled society with very little breathing room for individuals, short of building up a lot of rage and a lot of anger, reaching a critical mass, and having revolution. Revolution is what happens when you don't have evolution. Again, pardon the expression to those people out there who have difficulties with that word. The inherent contradiction is the following. When you engage the spiritual process, you are engaging your spiritual experience with life. If it produces good, you tend to repeat the behavior, a little bit like a dog, no insult, who gets a dog biscuit, you repeat the behavior. If it doesn't produce good, and you're an intelligent person, you will reflect upon yourself and say, aha, where was I slightly off base? And that's why I gave you the value priorities and religious priorities. And then you will self-correct and you will continue to go. And this is the religious methodology that is part of the general experience of life. It's a religious methodology because whether you have someone wagging a finger at you telling you that you sinned, or whether you're simply experiencing it in the order of life and how life is designed to produce good, meaning you don't put your finger in a hot flame, you'll burn. Okay. And you can learn from a scripture written by your parents that say don't. They can even write it down and you can worship the scripture for generations. That's how true it is. That's how true it is. But what we're doing in the process of that kind of spirituality is we are funneling everything to the individual experience. That's the American gift. That's the American gift. And that's why we have a tremendous and wonderful diversity. All right. I want to elevate that word because it's being smashed right now. A wonderful diversity, a wonderful plurality, a wonderful divergency of creativity in all ways. And this is the great legacy of the United States of America. It is the great legacy of the 60s. I am old enough to remember that. Your generation may not be. But when it reached its extreme, as all mind cracks do, they rubber band. So you have the rise of the neo-biblical conservative, I would say neo-Protestant American viewpoint, which expresses a different kind of natural law from an earlier stage of development. I'm not saying it's more primitive. I'm saying it's emerging because it's an important counterbalance to the previous one, which was very 1960s and free. And now you're getting a natural law, which is more traditional, more biblical, more Aquinian, meaning it's from St. Thomas Aquinas, did a marvelous job of formulating that. And what happens out of the contradiction of people being very, very free and very, very interested in their own personal, shall we say, wokeness. And I don't think that's a bad term at all. So do not think I'm at all denying the incredibly important truth that's in wokeness. There is an important truth in it, and we should not deny it. But out of that extreme, because it is an extreme view, you get the opposite view, which is a return to a more structured, regimented, orderly, um, traditionalist, Western Christian view, largely Protestant, to which is attached, as part of the great revelation of humankind, capitalism, which is a wonderful thing. We should not get rid of capitalism. We should just evolve it. The inherent contradiction that we're dealing with is that individual measuring of spirituality is inadequate. It's critical. It can't be thrown out. It is not bad. Okay, diversity and individual viewpoint and identity on an individual level, however challenging to the diversity, that diversity is to a agreed upon consensual order to civilization or society, right? However much it is a challenge. It is very, very important. However, it is also important, as we discussed, that there are certain core relationships that cannot be changed, such as those things around reproduction. And we discussed that already. And that becomes the opposite view. You cannot diversify so far. There are limits. Now, both sides are a little wobbly in terms of denial or depreciation of the opposite point of view, and that's why they're at loggerheads. But you're here on Godsearch, and in Godsearch, we are very, very careful of where there's a contradiction. There is a missing piece of truth. It is a strange, unusual contradiction in an irony that we human beings have the extraordinary ability to change the world according to our viewpoint and our divine original gift of selfishness. And at the same time, we are controlled by the very environment that we can change so radically. We have enormous freedom. And at the same time, that freedom takes place only within the so-called design of life and how life works. If we think of our spirituality as simply an algorithm that we're generating in our own mind in a virtual reality, well, that's fine, but you can't eat a hallucinogenic apple. If we think, however, that life is only completely structured by an engineer up in heaven called God, and that those engineering plans are 100% factually, without exception, 100% factually true as recorded in a 4,000, maybe 3,600, 3,600 year maybe scripture, and that's the way the world is designed, well, you're going to have another problem. And because we have these two views of individuality that is not connected to revelation, which is the American enlightenment, our natural law, and the opposite, which is biblical revelation, structured, right? Humanity, largely cisgendered, because that's how you get more people. They didn't have artificial techniques back then. You have these two competing formulations of natural law. And that is what we are dealing with in the United States of America. But the most important thing is this is not political. Hear me. This is the state of human beings and human spirituality. We can have our freedom and our viewpoint radically so, and at the same time, we can only have it within the structural design of things. Okay, you hear a lot of times you'll hear someone say, it's a classic Buddhist koan, Koan, a seemingly contradiction that is designed to move your intellectual understanding to a new level. One of the classic ones being, there's a tree that falls. If no one's there to see a tree fall in the woods, did the tree actually fall? Okay. If you don't hear the tree falling, did the tree actually fall? Is the perception of something actually its reality? This has a great relationship to the Bohr, B-O-H-R, Niels Bohr interpretation of quantum mechanics. And a lot of people have gone to town on this in a kind of spirituality that they believe is scientifically founded, because they consider quantum mechanics in its original formation to be exactly true because it's science. And that's an idolatry that we have to be very careful of. It's a religion, I think, which I call scientificism, where you measure everything by science in order to determine truth, which absolutely is exaggerated and in itself is an extreme that we are rebounding from, because science has radically destroyed the texture of the living environment that we live in, and people are not fully trusting it, not fully trusting it. So when you take that kind of belief that say, well, my reality is what determines the truth, which is the spiritual approach that we narrated at the beginning of Godsearch, you will oftentimes reach a contradiction, and you will reach it in your relationships. It's okay for you to seek what is good and true for you. However, if you want to live alone, you may not have a contradiction, but the minute you have to get some money to pay for your car insurance, or the minute you need to eat, you're going to come into relationships with other people. The minute you want to make love, the minute you want to mate, all these things are going to bring you into contrasts with other people. And your sense of good will have to evolve beyond yourself personally to include other people and not only include other people, but it will have to include our society. It will not just have to do that, it will have to include our species. And that will not be good enough because we will have to include all the species that supply us with food and all the other species that supply the other species with the food that supplies us. It's inescapable. So here's the inherent contradiction. I apologize. We didn't talk about the R word, we talked about the S word. Then out of the S word, we talked about the religious methodology that's part of everyday spirituality, even if it's secular and not religious. And now we come to the contradiction, which is there's no such way to live in life without some form of religion. Sorry to burst anyone's bubble that you're spiritual, you're not religious, or that you're religious but you have a more spiritual view. These are things that we're wobbling with because of these two competing views of natural law, one which is based on individual rights and the other which is based on group survival needs, including the perpetuation of more people. You see, in this era, we're dealing with this contradiction because sperm counts are dropping. Human beings, which once largely in biblical times focused the reproductive apparatus to more exclusively pump out people, because by doing that, the consciousness of tool making, the consciousness of being supra and supernatural increased on the planet. And we were able to develop a dominance to our species over other species. And that became a marvelous thing to be able to control earthly nature and adapt it to us. But unfortunately, when we took that to its extreme, the opposite took place. And instead of focusing up on technology, other people created a revolution in thought that was focusing up on consciousness, and it was focusing up on nature and ecology. Now you have the opposite where they're slamming nature and slamming ecology because people are afraid to lose the great gift of mental dominance, the great gift of material dominance. And that's why they amalgam their spiritual insights under capitalism as if capitalism is intrinsically bound to biblical theology, which it is not. Okay? Free enterprise, perhaps, but capitalism is another thing entirely. By the way, don't do a mind crack and say I'm a communist, because you'd be wrong. I'm not a communist. Okay? I'm not either one. I don't care about these mind cracks. I look for the truth that's in each thing. The inherent contradiction is now over. We're going forward in our God search to do the following: have your life experience. And your personal life experience is your measure of truth that is brought to you for the purpose of your advancement. And you will discover as you continue that spirituality, you will notice in your life what is classic religious boundaries begin to emerge from the life experiences that you have. We've discussed it. Go take promiscuity to its extreme, you wind up with the worst venereal disease in the history of the world. There is a balance. You cannot take it to the extreme without the counterbalance coming in. It's built in. So whether you learn so-called morality from books that record it from previous stages, which is very useful. It's very useful to have a book that says, don't burn your hand in a candle. Okay, don't do that. Or you learn it nakedly in the American experience under natural law and reconstitute a living understanding of boundaries that are built into life, that are applicable to life because they're discovered in real time. Well, there are two ways to approach it. You can draw upon the past and evaluate the lessons of the past. You can evaluate the teachings from other people and see if they're applicable to your current experiences in life, or you can strip away everything and start from scratch and learn them from basics. It doesn't make a difference. Life intrinsically deals with the contradiction, meaning every individual is a member of a species, every species is composed of individuals. The seemingly contradiction of the American experience, which is radical individuality and you save yourself and provide for yourself, all of that is an extreme because the natural law philosophy that we inherited in the US was itself an extreme from the previous. And the previous had gotten so extreme, it fostered a natural law viewpoint that was individual based. Governments were pushed down, religions were pushed down. We are lost here in a massive historical conflict. If you out there are suffering because one side of you says yes and the other side of you says no, and one side of you wants to do one thing, but then there's a side of you that comes in and says, I shouldn't do that. If you're experiencing in your freedom all sorts of boundary issues with relationships, with marriages that are falling apart, with children who are getting a little excessive and getting wild in a way that is costing you a fortune. And you have to rediscover all of the boundaries that are built into life in order to bring some semblance of wholeness and restore some semblance of wholeness out of this massive contradiction that we're living with. If you have to do that, well, that's what you have to do. Welcome to a new era. The 60s isn't here. The 80s is not here. The 90s is not going to continue with the same force that it has been doing. We are rapidly approaching a watershed event where the two aspects of our minds, one that takes care of our individual power and our individual selfishness and ability to re-engineer life, and the side of us that is completely beholding to life and completely dependent upon life and each other, our individuality consciousness and our group consciousness, our individual abstract thinking consciousness, which is almost cosmic in its scale, and our basic humble earthliness that requires us, even if we go to Mars, to take sacks of air and food along with us until we grow our own. This supreme disconnection between mind and body, between thought and material, which is intrinsic to the human being who has eaten of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, meaning we can dissect creation, understand how it operates, and rearrange it. This supreme contradiction, this original gift, from my point of view, otherwise we wouldn't have much of anything, or the original sin, which takes its viewpoint from the standpoint of you can mess up. These are both correct views. The original gift is a more spiritual view. I know my market. The original sin is a more classic religious viewpoint. It's been contaminated, so I tend not to use it. But they're both true. They both address the existential fact of humanity that we live very much in a contradictory state with radical freedom and radical dependency. And any group, red, blue, in between, that does not address the incredible dependency, which is the foundation of human life, any group that seeks an independency, which is not in hyphen dependence, and any dependency that squelches the independent thinking of individuals will create a contradiction, and we will sow and reap it and experience it. And that is why we're having problems. We are having problems because we sowed and reaped stupid ideas. This was my first book. stupid ideas, stupid ways, smart ways to think about God. I wrote it with my mentor, Jack Bemperod. We have sowed and reaped stupid philosophical understandings, and we are actually living through a material outpicturing of our own mind cracks. So I'm calling on everyone here on this next new phase of Godsearch where I want to move beyond these contradictions, beyond this mind crack between spirituality and religion, beyond all of these confusions where religion has become political and non-religion has become political, and all we have is a single humanity paradigmatized, made paradigmatic. I get confused on these academic terms in the United States, and we are, as a people, need to regain our sense of selves, but as true American, which is not the same as traditional Christian. This may be controversial for some, and I really don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. America is, from a standpoint of heritage and legacy, we are Christian derived. And we have derived that from that a kind of natural law that is derived from a Christian dialogue within itself. There's no doubt about that, that is our heritage in the United States of America. Okay. But we are not a Christian nation. We are first and foremost an Enlightenment natural law nation, and that has weaknesses that need the viewpoint that is currently getting very heightened in the US, which is a more classic Western Christian viewpoint. Its viewpoint must be heard. It's a correction to the opposite extreme where individuality has gone insane, and both sides do the same thing to each other, thinking they're doing something else because everyone is lost in this mind game. Enough said. Would you like to get past the contradiction? Then continue your God search. Let's go one step at a time. Please reach out to me, yourgodsearch.com. Let's continue the dialogue. Many, many people are learning new approaches by which they can smooth out these contradictions and get past them, and techniques by which they can reorder their lives and their behaviors so everything flows much better, but not just for you, but for everyone you come in contact, and not just for everyone you come in contact, for the very ground that you walk on, for the very plants that grow around you. There is an order of natural law that we wanted to discuss next time, which is beyond the rudimentary Greek seeking the good, or beyond the Thomistic, more government and authority and orderliness of the human species and civilization, and beyond its correction in the American. There is a natural law, which is a true spiritual phenomenon out of which correct religion pops, correct spirituality pops, correct politics pops, correct relationships pop, and it is, I would say, spirituality with a capital S. And we need to talk about that because there is a silent revolution going on right now. And it needs to become more vocal in a way that doesn't get us trapped in the same contradictions. Okay. If we don't pay close attention to the next thing, which is the seeking of a mind which is greater than any of our minds, an opinion that is beyond opinions. If we don't actually, in our God search, begin to search for lack of a better term, what you might call the divine mind, divinity, nature with a capital N, beyond any subordinate nature, a reality beyond our realities, an existence beyond our existence, yet including our existences and our realities. If we don't go there, we will live in a state of perpetual contradiction. That's beyond us. We're extraordinary creatures. We are created with a sense of an ability to sense what is unity. Sense a unity even beyond our mortal capacity to fully imitate in our day-to-day troubled lives. It's a marvelous adventure, and the God search continues. So uncover God, discover God, and recover God by recovering your original sense of yourself before you bit that apple. Whether you believe the story to be actual and factual, or whether it is mere metaphor for an existential reality that is part of everyone's existence, living in a contradiction between freedom and order. It doesn't make a difference. There is an answer beyond that. There is an answer beyond this contradiction. Thank you so much for spending some time of your life, by the way. I value the fact that you're actually lending me some of your time from your very life. And I really take that very, very seriously, and I take that as a compliment. And thank you for spending some of that. And if you want to spend a little more, I'll see you next week, about 5:45 a.m. Eastern Daytime. God bless. Bye-bye.